The door was locked. Marin Holloway stood on the porch and stared at the brass knob, the way a person stares at a familiar face that has suddenly stopped recognizing them. She turned it once, then again, then a third time slower, as if the lock might soften under patience the way some things soften under patience. It did not. The knob held firm. The door held firm. The world on the other side of that door, the small, cluttered, wine-stained world that had been hers for the past year and a half, held firm against her. A black trash bag sat at her feet. It contained everything she owned: a folded pair of jeans, 3 shirts, a hairbrush with broken bristles, a photograph of her mother in a cardboard frame, a pair of work boots she had bought with her first paycheck from a diner that had closed 6 months later, a book she had been meaning to finish, a toothbrush, a small zippered pouch with $7 and change at the bottom. Taped to the bag was a piece of yellow notebook paper, the edge torn unevenly along the spiral. The handwriting on it was familiar. Loops too large, the pen pressed hard enough to dent the paper. "Sorry, need the room." That was all. Marin read it once, then again, then a third time, not because she did not understand, but because she was waiting to feel something. Surprise, anger, the hot, clean burn of betrayal. Something that would tell her she was still alive in the way the living are supposed to be alive. But nothing came. The note sat in her hand flat and final, and the only thing she felt was the same low, flat heaviness she had been carrying for as long as she could remember. The heaviness of a girl nobody had ever decided to keep. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March. The light over Asheville was thin and pale, the kind of light that comes after a long winter and before a real spring, when the world has not quite decided what it wants to be yet. The mountains stood in the distance, behind the houses, blue and slow and patient, as if they had seen 1,000 girls stand on 1,000 porches with 1,000 notes in their hands and were waiting to see what this one would do. Marin picked up the bag. She did not knock. She did not call out. She walked down the porch steps in the cracked concrete path and through the gate, which still had the broken latch nobody had ever bothered to fix, and she walked toward the bus station without looking back. The bag hit her leg with every step. Inside it, the brush rattled against the work boots, and the work boots thudded softly against the photograph of her mother, and she kept walking. By the time she reached the corner, she had already begun counting. $47. She had counted it that morning, sitting on her aunt's couch with a cup of coffee that had gone cold while she was still drinking it. 2 20s. Ifumayu. 2 1s. 3 quarters, 4 dimes, and a nickel. $47 even. She counted it every morning the way her aunt counted bottles in the recycling bin, and the way the woman at the unemployment office counted forms before she stapled them. People who had almost nothing always knew exactly how much they had. It was a kind of math you learned without anybody teaching it to you. By the time she was 19, she had learned how to leave. It was the first real skill she had ever developed. She could pack a life into a bag in under 3 minutes. She could sleep on a floor without complaining. She could walk into a strange room and find the exit before she found the chair. 8 apartments, 3 states, 2 shelters. 1 group home in Georgia where the woman who ran the place smelled like dryer sheets and prayed over the food in a voice so quiet it felt like an apology. The addresses changed. The smell of the carpets changed. The names of the people who told her to be quiet at night changed. But the feeling never changed. That flat, hollow silence that comes after a door closes behind you for the last time. The feeling of being a person nobody had decided to keep. The bus station in downtown Asheville sat between a payday loan office and a barbershop with a striped pole that had stopped turning years ago. The benches inside were green metal and bolted to the floor. The vending machine was missing 2 of its rows. A janitor was mopping the same square of tile he had been mopping since Marin walked into the gray water, leaving long streaks that dried slower than he could move. She sat on a bench by the window and set the bag between her feet. Somewhere outside, a bus was running its engine. A woman with a child on her hip was buying a ticket at the counter. A man in a stained Carhartt jacket was eating a microwave sandwich out of a plastic wrapper. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed the way fluorescent lights always hum, like the room itself was complaining about being awake. Marin took out her phone. The screen was cracked across the corner from a fall she could not remember anymore. The battery was at 38%. She opened the browser and went back to the page she had bookmarked 2 weeks earlier in the dark on her aunt's couch at 2 in the morning, when the wine glasses on the coffee table had gone empty and her aunt was snoring in the other room, and the only light in the world had been the small blue square of the screen in her hand. She had been scrolling that night the way people scroll when they cannot sleep. Foreclosures, tax sales, government surplus listings, the kind of pages where buildings went for the price of their own paperwork. Most of what she had seen was junk. Empty lots, trailers without floors, houses so far gone that buying them would have been the same as buying a wrecking job. But one listing had stopped her. Decommissioned fire station, Calderwood, Virginia, population 408, vacant since 1971, $10 in delinquent property taxes. The county was selling it for $10 to clear the books. 2 previous auctions had received no bids. The photograph showed a small 2-story building with dark red brick. A single garage bay door sat in the middle of the front, paint long faded, and above it, painted in white, that had grown soft around the edges, was a number. Just a 7, like the building had only ever had one job and someone had decided that was all it needed to say. $10. She had stared at that number for a long time that night on her aunt's couch in the dark, with the cold coffee on the side table and the mountains invisible outside the window. $10 was not a price. It was a sentence. It was the kind of number a county put on a building when they had given up on it, when all anyone wanted anymore was for it to belong to somebody else. She had bookmarked it because she could not stop looking at it. The photograph of that small red building with the faded number 7 above the door had felt for some reason she could not name, like the only thing in the world that was looking back at her. Now on the green metal bench in the bus station with a trash bag between her feet and $47 in her pocket, she opened the listing again. The building was still there. The number was still 7. The price was still $10. She stood up and walked to the counter. The man behind the glass was old, with thick eyebrows that had gone gray ahead of the rest of his hair, and he was reading a paperback novel with a cracked spine. He turned a page, finished the line he was on, and only then lifted his eyes. "Where to?" he said. "Calderwood, Virginia." He blinked once. He typed slowly with 2 fingers. The screen flickered. "Transfer in Lynchburg," he said. 6 hours total, $34. Marin counted the money on the counter. 2 20s, a 5. He gave her $1 in change. The ticket came out of a small machine with a soft sound like a sigh. She had $13 left, of which she would soon spend 10, which would leave 3. $3 between her and nothing. She walked back to the bench and sat down and set the ticket on top of the trash bag. She was about to slide the phone back into her pocket when she saw her aunt's name come up on the screen. Not a call, a text sent 10 minutes earlier that the bad signal in the station had only just delivered. The text was not to Marin. It had been sent to a contact in her aunt's phone called T, and her aunt had bumped Marin's name onto the thread by accident, the way people do when they are drunk or upset, or both copying a message they had already sent to somebody else. Marin read it. It told T not to come by until Friday. It told T she had finally gotten the girl out. It told T that the girl had been asking too many questions about what was in the back closet, and that Trent was right, they could not keep her around anymore, no matter how much the rent help had been worth. It said the girl was probably already gone. Trent was the boyfriend. Marin had only met him twice. A wiry man in his 40s with a thin mustache and a smile that did not move his eyes when he smiled. He had come over once on a Sunday afternoon and once on a Wednesday night, both times with a duffel bag he kept in the back closet, both times leaving without the duffel bag, and both times Marin had pretended she had not noticed. She had pretended a lot of things in that house. Pretending was another thing she had gotten good at. She had not been thrown out because the room was needed. She had been thrown out because she had become inconvenient to a man who kept a duffel bag in a back closet, and her aunt had decided on a Tuesday afternoon in March that the man was worth more than the niece. It should have hurt more than it did. She set the phone face down on the bench beside her, and she did not pick it up again until they called her bus. The first bus took her out of the mountains. It was a long, slow climb out of Asheville, the road bending around the shoulders of the Blue Ridge, the trees along the highway still bare from winter. Marin sat by the window with the trash bag wedged between her feet and her forehead resting against the cold glass, and watched the landscape she had lived inside for a year and a half pass by her in a way she had never really seen it. The mountains were enormous. She had never noticed before. They had been the backdrop of everything. But now leaving them, she saw them properly for the first time. Wave after wave of dark blue layered against the horizon like the sea had been frozen mid-motion and tilted up on its side. They had been there long before she was born, and they would be there long after she was gone, and they did not care that a girl on a bus was leaving them. That should have made her feel small. It made her feel something else. It made her feel like the world was much, much bigger than the room she had just been locked out of. The bus crested and began the long, slow descent toward the Piedmont. The land flattened, gentled, opened up. Tobacco fields began appearing on either side of the highway. Towns slid by with single stoplights and Baptist churches and gas stations advertising boiled peanuts. She thought about her mother. She did this rarely now. Her mother had been 36 years old when she died. She had worked at a hospital cafeteria. She had laughed loud and easily the way people laugh who have not had everything beaten out of them yet. She had told Marin when Marin was 12 that they were going to be all right. Then a tractor trailer had come around a curve in the rain in South Carolina, and she had not been all right. Her mother had told her almost nothing about the family. Marin knew her grandmother's name had been Ruth, and that Ruth had died of a stroke when her mother was 20. She knew there had been a grandfather somewhere, but her mother had never spoken of him. The one time Marin had asked when she was about 8 years old, her mother had stopped what she was doing in the kitchen and looked out the window for a long moment, and then said quietly that her father had died in a fire when she was very small, and that they did not talk about it because talking about it did not bring him back. Marin had not asked again. Now on a bus in Virginia with the Piedmont rolling past her and the late sun cutting gold across the tobacco fields, she thought about that conversation for the first time in years. She thought about her mother standing at the kitchen sink. She thought about the way her mother had said the word fire low and final as if it were the name of a country she would never visit again. She would remember later that she had thought about it because of what she would later find in a basement. The bus pulled into Lynchburg at twilight. The station there was bigger than the one in Asheville and busier. Soldiers in fatigue sat against the wall with duffel bags between their boots. A family of 5 was eating fried chicken out of a paper bucket on a bench. An old man in a tweed cap was reading a newspaper, turning the pages with the slow, careful motion of a man who had been reading newspapers in bus stations for 60 years and had no intention of being rushed about it. She had 40 minutes until her connecting bus. She bought a granola bar from a vending machine for $1.25. She ate it slowly, watching the old man fold one section of the paper and start the next. There was something about the way he turned the pages as if turning a page was a small act of faith, as if the world was held together by men in tweed caps, reading newspapers in bus stations at twilight, and if any of them stopped, the whole thing would come apart. The second bus was smaller, a local route. 6 other passengers, all of them older than her, all of them silent. The road wound through pine woods and farmland. The light went out of the sky slowly in long, wavering bands of orange and rose, and finally a deep, bruised purple, and then the dark took everything. The headlights of oncoming cars came at her one by one, paused past. Somewhere in the distance, a freight train was running, and Marin could hear its horn low and long, the kind of sound that does not so much travel as settle. She did not know exactly when they crossed into Calderwood. There was no sign she could see in the dark. There was only at some point a slowing of the bus and then a pull off beside a gas station and then the driver calling back over his shoulder. Calderwood! Anybody for Calderwood? Marin stood up. She picked up the trash bag. She walked down the aisle. The doors hissed open. She stepped down onto the pavement, and the doors hissed closed behind her, and the bus pulled away with a slow growl of diesel, and the red of its taillights got smaller and smaller until it turned a corner she could not see, and then it was gone. She stood on the side of the road. The gas station was closed. A single bulb burned over the pumps, drawing moths out of the dark. Somewhere far off, a dog barked twice and stopped. The air smelled like pine sap and wood smoke, and very faintly like something turned that she could not place. The earth itself, maybe. The long, damp earth of the Piedmont settling into spring. She started walking. The county office was on Main Street, 4 blocks down, and one over in a small cinder block building next to a post office. A bell rang when she pushed the office door open. The room smelled like paper and burnt coffee and the faintest trace of mothballs. The woman behind the counter was somewhere in her 70s. She had silver hair pulled back into a low knot and a pair of reading glasses pushed up on top of her head and a cardigan the color of oatmeal buttoned all the way to the throat. She was holding a stamp and her hand had been moving toward an ink pad when Marin came in, and now her hand had stopped suspended in the air. "Help you," she said. The voice was not unfriendly. It was the voice of a woman who had been working a counter for 40 years and had stopped wasting words on people whose business she did not yet know. Marin stepped up to the counter. "I'm here for the fire station." The stamp came down on the ink pad. The woman did not look at the ink pad. She looked at Marin. She looked at her face. She looked at her clothes. She looked briefly at the trash bag on the floor and then back up. In a town of 408 people, there was only one fire station that anyone would walk in off the street to ask about. She set the stamp down. She lowered the reading glasses onto her nose. "Can I see your ID?" Marin slid the driver's license across. The woman picked it up. She read the name. Then her eyes moved very slightly the way the eyes of a person move when they have just heard a word in a language they thought they had forgotten. She did not speak. She turned the license over as if there might be something on the back. There was not. She turned it face up again. "Holloway," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "That a family name?" "It was my mother's name." The woman did not respond to that. She held the license a moment longer. Then she pulled a clipboard from a slot under the counter and slid it across with a deed transfer form clipped to it. "Honey," she said, "that building hasn't been used since 1971. The roof leaks. The wiring's been pulled. The basement floods every spring. There's a reason nobody wants it. 2 folks have come for it in the last 6 years. Both of them paid the $10, and both of them changed their mind before sundown the next day. The last one came back in about 3 hours, didn't say a word, just put the keys on the counter and walked out." She looked at Marin. "You sure you want to do this?" Marin put a 5 and 4 ones and a quarter and 3 dimes and 4 nickels on the counter. $10 even. The woman looked at the money. Then she looked at Marin's face for a long, slow moment. Then she said almost to herself, "Holloway." She did not say it like a name. She said it like a memory. She picked up the pen. She tapped with the cap of the pen 3 places on the form. "Sign here, and here, and here." When the last signature was done, the woman blew softly on the ink and stamped it once hard with a flat final sound. She slid a brass key across the counter. The key was old. The teeth were dulled. The bow had a tag on it, tied with twine, and on the tag, in faded ink, somebody had written a long time ago, "Station 7. It's 4 blocks up Plank Road. On the left. You can't miss it. The number's painted above the door." Marin took the key. She picked up the trash bag. She turned to go. She was almost at the door when the woman spoke again. "Miss Holloway." Marin turned. "You take care of yourself in that building," the woman said. Her voice was different now, lower, almost careful. The woman seemed to consider saying more. She drew a breath. She let it out. Whatever she had been about to say, she folded back inside her like a letter she had decided not to send. "Just take care of yourself," she said again. Maren nodded. She did not know what else to do. She pushed open the door. Plank Road was a side street that dead-ended at a railroad crossing. Old oaks lined both sides, their bare branches knit overhead into a dark lattice of crooked black. There were houses set back from the road behind chain link, with lit windows and the blue flicker of televisions inside. Somewhere in one of them, a woman laughed. Somewhere in another, a baby cried briefly and was hushed. The fire station sat on the left halfway down the block. 2 stories, dark red brick. A single garage bay door rusted half open and frozen on its tracks. The windows on the upper floor were broken, the frames gone soft and gray. Ivy covered the right side of the building from the foundation to the roofline, thick and tangled and old. To the left of the bay, a small wooden door that must have been the personnel entrance. Above the bay, painted in white that had faded to the color of bone, was a number. 7. She stood on the sidewalk and looked up at it. A pickup passed behind her on the cross street. A porch light 2 houses down came on. Somewhere in the dark, the freight train sounded its horn again, lower and longer than before. She walked up the cracked concrete apron. She put the key in the small wooden door. The lock did not turn easily. It resisted the way old locks resist, the way old things resist when you ask them to do something they have not been asked to do in a long time. She worked the key back and forth. Something inside the mechanism finally moved slow and reluctant, and the bolt slid back with a soft, gritty click. The door opened. The smell came out first. Damp brick, old wood, mildew. Something sharper underneath, mineral and cold, like the breath of a basement where water had been finding its way in for 50 years. Maren stepped inside. Her flashlight from her phone came on, and the light moved across the floor and up the walls and into the high-vaulted space of the apparatus bay, where a fire truck had once sat ready, where men had once pulled coats off hooks in the middle of the night and run out the bay door into the dark, where the concrete still held the faint grooves of tires that had not rolled in over half a century. She closed the door behind her. She set down the trash bag. And somewhere above her, faint, almost too faint to be heard at all, there was a sound, a creak of wood, a small settling. The kind of sound an old building makes at night. The sound came again, and this time it was not above her. It was below. Beneath the concrete floor, somewhere in a darkness she had not yet seen in a part of the building, she did not yet know existed, something had shifted. A soft, deliberate scrape, as if a footstep had been taken and then taken back, as if someone down there had heard her come in and had stopped. The flashlight beam in her hand was steady. The building was silent again. But the silence was different now. The silence was listening. She waited a full minute, then another. The beam from her phone made a small white circle on the concrete floor in front of her, and inside that circle, a few flecks of dust drifted slowly, the way dust drifts when a door has just been opened and the air in a room has been disturbed for the first time in a long while. The sound did not come again. She told herself in the practical level voice she had developed over the years, for telling herself things she needed to believe, that old buildings settled, that ivy creaked against brick, that mice lived in walls and rats lived in basements and raccoons lived in attics. She told herself that. She did not entirely believe it, but she was 19 years old and she had $3 in her pocket and she had nowhere else to go. And the only door she had walked through that day that had opened for her was the door of the building she was standing inside. She moved the flashlight in a slow arc. The apparatus bay was larger than she had expected. Maybe 30 feet wide, 50 deep, with a ceiling that vaulted up into thick wooden beams. The concrete floor was stained dark with the slow geology of 50 years of leaks in oil and time. Along the left wall, a row of metal hooks still stood at the height where firefighters had once hung their coats. At the back of the bay, against the rear wall, a narrow wooden staircase climbed into the dark of the second floor. She walked the perimeter of the base slowly. She wanted to know every door, every opening. It was a habit she had picked up in the group home in Georgia where the woman who smelled like dryer sheets had taught her without meaning to that the first thing you did in any new room was learn the exits. She found the front door. She found the bay door frozen on its rusted tracks. She found a small high window on the back wall painted over and unopenable. And then almost in the corner where the staircase met the rear wall, she found something she had not seen on the way in. A door. A metal door painted the same dark color as the brick around it, so that in the dim ambient light from outside it disappeared into the wall. A heavy iron handle. Above the handle, bolted into the metal, a small enamel sign that the years had almost erased. The flashlight beam fell on the sign. The letters were faded and pitted, but they were still readable. Basement. No unauthorized entry. The handle had once been painted black, but the paint had long since worn off where a hand would grub it. A faint patina of dust covered the rest of the door. But not the handle. The handle was clean. Not polished clean, not new clean, but clean in the particular way that something is clean when a hand has gripped it recently. The kind of clean that says somebody not very long ago took hold of this thing and turned it. She lifted her own hand and pressed it against the metal. The handle was cold. She closed her fingers around it. It turned. She did not pull. She let go. The handle returned with the soft mechanical patience of old hardware to its original position. She took a step back. Below her, beneath the concrete, the building was silent. If anything had moved down there, it was not moving now. She turned away. She picked up the trash bag and carried it to the foot of the staircase. She climbed. The stairs creaked under her weight, but they held the way old wood that has been given time to settle into itself sometimes holds better than new wood that has not yet earned the right to be tired. The second floor was a single open room, the bunk room, the place where volunteer firefighters had slept on cots when they were on call. There were still two metal bed frames bolted to the floor near the windows, their mattresses long gone. A pot-belly stove stood in the center of the room, its black iron sides cold to the touch. The floor was wide pine plank, dusty but solid. The windows were broken. Cold air came through them. She could see between the gaps in the upper branches of the oaks outside the faint shapes of rooftops in a church steeple, and further off the dim white line of a railroad crossing. She set the trash bag on the floor beside one of the bed frames. She sat down beside it. She did not unpack. There was no point. Tomorrow she would deal with tomorrow. Tonight she only needed to make it to the morning. She wrapped her jacket tighter around herself. She took out the photograph of her mother in its cardboard frame, looked at it for a long moment and put it back. She pulled out one of her work boots and put it under her head as a pillow, and she lay down on her side on the pine plank floor. She did not sleep right away. She listened. The building was full of sounds. Some were the sounds buildings always made. The pop of a beam adjusting to the temperature. The faint tick of pipes that no longer carried any water. The whisper of wind through the broken windows. A small skitter somewhere in the wall that might have been a mouse, and that she chose to believe was a mouse because the alternative was a different word she did not want to use. But beneath all of those sounds, beneath the weather sounds, in the wood sounds, in the small living thing sounds, there was nothing. The basement was quiet. She did not hear anything from down there for the rest of the night. She did eventually sleep. She did not remember falling asleep, only that at some point the dark behind her eyelids grew warmer, and the cold of the pine planks grew less, and she was on a bus again, and her mother was sitting across the aisle from her, and her mother was about to say something important. Her mother opened her mouth. Her mother lifted her hand. The bus went around a curve in the rain. And then Myron was awake, and the gray light of an early Virginia morning was coming through the broken windows, and a mourning dove was calling from somewhere on the roof, and her cheek was numb from the boot under her head. She sat up slowly. She looked around the bunk room in the daylight. It was less frightening in the daylight. The pine planks were the color of old honey. The brick walls had a softness to them the way old brick does, as if the heat of 100 summers had been held in them and slowly given back. A spider had made a web in the corner of one of the bed frames. The web was empty. The spider was gone. It had moved on. She went to the broken window. Calderwood in the morning was small, smaller even than she had thought it would be. A handful of streets, a church, a general store, a diner with a hand-painted sign, a post office with a flag that in the wind off the railroad was finally moving. There were not many cars. There were not many people. A woman was sweeping a sidewalk in front of a building 3 blocks away, and a man in coveralls was opening the door of the gas station, and a black and white dog was lying in the middle of a side street with the patience of a dog that had been lying in the middle of streets for many years and had not yet been hit by anything. The town was quiet in the way of towns that did not try to be anything else. She turned around and looked at the bunk room behind her, and she thought with the clear, practical thought of a person who has stopped having the luxury of any other kind, that this was hers now. The roof leaked. The wiring was gone. The basement flooded every spring. But the walls were brick. The beams were oak. The floor was solid pine. And it belonged to her completely for the first time in her life. That was a thing. That was a small, hard thing she could hold on to. She went downstairs. The basement door was waiting where she had left it. She had thought about the basement all night in the gaps between the building sounds. She had thought about the clean handle. She had thought about the soft scrape from below. She had thought about the woman at the county office and the way her face had moved when she read the name Holloway and the way she had paused before saying, "Take care of yourself," in that building. And Marin had decided somewhere in the long gray hour before dawn that whatever was down there, she was going to find it before it found her. She did not have a flashlight other than her phone. She did not have a weapon. She did not have anything really except a brass key and a stubbornness she had been refining since she was 14 years old. She took her phone out and turned the flashlight on. She walked to the basement door. She put her hand on the handle. She pulled. The door was heavier than she had expected. The hinges groaned the long, low groan of metal that had not moved in years, and a wash of cold air came up out of the dark beyond smelling of mineral and damp and very old paper. Stairs led down, concrete stairs narrow with a black iron handrail bolted to the wall on the right side. The flashlight beam went into the dark and was eaten by it the way light is eaten by deep enclosed spaces. She stepped onto the first stair. The stair did not creak. Concrete did not creak. That was one good thing about concrete. She went down slowly. The basement opened around her at the bottom of the stairs, and it was bigger than she had expected. The full footprint of the building, 30 feet by 50, a low ceiling, maybe 7 feet, supported by thick concrete columns that ran in 2 parallel rows down the length of the room. The floor was poured concrete damp in patches, but not flooded. The walls were concrete, 2 painted white. At some long ago point, the paint now flaking the surface, streaked with the slow mineral weep of decades of water finding its way through the foundation. The room was not empty. Along the far wall, stacked 3 deep and nearly to the ceiling, were wooden crates, dozens of them. She moved the flashlight across them. Military-style crates, olive drab paint, stenciled markings on the sides. She walked closer. The markings in white block letters that had faded to a ghostly cream read Civil Defense, Calderwood Station 7, 1962. She knew vaguely what civil defense meant. Cold War, fallout shelters, duck and cover drills, the films they had shown in school assemblies in the 1960s, the ones about hiding under your desk in case the bombs came, the ones her mother had told her about once laughing, the one time her mother had ever talked about her own childhood in any detail. But she had never thought about where the supplies for any of that had actually gone. She had never imagined until this moment that in a small town in Virginia, in the basement of a fire station that had been closed for 50 years, there might still be the actual stacked, sealed remains of a country preparing for the end of the world. She pried the lid off the nearest crate. The wood was dry, and gave easily under her hands. Inside, neatly packed in rows, were canned goods, government-issue survival rations. The labels were yellow and brown. With age, the printing faded, but the cans themselves were sound. Crackers, canned water, medical kits in small green tins, wool blankets sealed in plastic, a row of hand-cranked flashlights still in their original cardboard packaging. She opened another crate, more the same, another, the same again. The supplies had been packed by men who believed they would be needed. They had not been needed. The world had not, after all, ended. The men were almost certainly all dead by now, and their preparations sealed in olive drab boxes and tucked into the basement of a small Virginia fire station had outlasted them. There was something about that made Marin's chest go quiet. Not exactly, just quiet. Like she had walked into a room that had been waiting for somebody. She kept moving. She moved past the wall of crates deeper into the basement. The flashlight beam swept along the columns. The floor here sloped slightly. The air grew cooler. There were old coils of hose along one wall, a wooden shelving unit holding rusted tools, a stack of folded canvas tarps gray with dust. And then in the back corner of the basement, set apart from everything else, as if it had been put there on purpose to be hard to find a smaller crate. This one was different. It was not wood, it was metal. A foot locker painted the same dark olive as the wooden crates, but heavier with reinforced corners, and a hasp at the front and a rusted padlock on the hasp. The padlock was open. The shackle of the lock had been pulled free of its loop, and the lock itself dangled from one side of the hasp by its chain. Whoever had unlocked it had not closed it again. She crouched in front of the foot locker. She listened. The basement was completely silent. She set her hand on the lid. The metal was cold, colder than the concrete floor, colder even than the iron handle on the basement door upstairs. She lifted the lid. The hinges did not creak. They had been oiled recently. She could smell the oil. Inside the footlocker was a canvas pouch folded over itself and tied with twine. The pouch was clean. The twine was clean. The whole interior of the footlocker, in fact, was clean in a way that the rest of the basement was not. There was no dust on the canvas, no dust on the twine, no dust on the inside of the lid. Somebody had been in here recently. Her hand shook very slightly as she reached for the pouch. She stopped. She looked over her shoulder. The flashlight beam lit the wall of crates in the nearer columns. Beyond them, the basement disappeared into a darkness her phone could not reach. Nothing moved. She picked up the pouch. It was heavier than she expected. Solid. The contents inside it had weight and shape and edges. She untied the twine. She unfolded the canvas. And inside, as the flashlight beam slid across them, she saw a thick brown envelope. And beneath the envelope, the spine of a leather-bound book, and beside the book, tucked into a smaller paper sleeve, a second smaller envelope sealed with red wax. She set the pouch down on the concrete floor beside her. She opened the brown envelope first. What was inside was paper, a great deal of paper, stiff, slightly yellowed, engraved in a way she had never seen paper engraved before, with elaborate borders and small printed eagles and serial numbers and signatures in a careful formal hand. She lifted the top sheet out and held it close to the flashlight. It was a United States savings bond. She did not know much about savings bonds. She knew vaguely that they were a thing the government issued. But this was not one savings bond. There were dozens. She fanned them out gently on the concrete floor in front of her. Series E. The dates range from the mid-1950s to the late 1960s. Each one was made out in the same careful printed name to Calderwood Volunteer Fire Department Station, 7 Benevolent Fund. She counted them 3 times. The face values added up when she finished to $42,000. She did not know, sitting on the concrete floor of a basement in a small Virginia town, with the cold of the floor coming up through her jeans, what those bonds were worth now. She knew only in the most general way that savings bonds held for 50 or 60 years past their issue dates accumulated interest, and that their actual value would be greater, possibly much greater, than the face amount. She would learn later from a lawyer in a town an hour away that the total with 60 years of accumulated interest came to slightly over $87,000. But she did not know that yet. She set the bonds gently aside. She picked up the leather-bound book. It was a ledger. The cover was deep brown, the leather rubbed soft at the corners, the spine cracked but intact. There was no title on the cover. Only embossed in faded gold near the bottom, write two initials, RB. She opened the cover. The handwriting on the first page was careful and precise, the kind of handwriting that belonged to a man who had been taught to write a long time ago and had never stopped writing the same way. It was done in blue fountain pen ink. The ink itself faded to a deep, dignified blue-black. The first page said, Benevolent Fund, Calderwood Volunteer Fire Department Station 7. Record of contributions and disbursements, kept by Captain Roy Bristow. She turned the page. The entries began on the second page. They were dated, they were small. $2 from a man named James Pickering in June of 1948. $5 from the Ladies' Auxiliary Bake Sale in September of 1949. $1.50 from the collection plate at the Fireman's Picnic in August of 1951. $2 from a man named Howard Lacey in October of 1951, with a note next to it in the same careful hand in memory of his brother Earl. She read down the page. She turned to the next page. She turned to the page after that. The entries went on year after year, small amounts. The money was given by people whose names she did not know, people who had lived in this town and who had given what they could because they had believed in something. A bake sale, a collection plate, a widow's small contribution in memory of her husband, a boy donating his paper route earnings. She turned another page, and then she stopped. She stopped because the entry for November of 1968 had a name she knew. She read it twice. She read it a third time. The entry was written in the same careful hand as all the others in the same blue-black ink. It was not large. It was not marked off in any way. It was simply there, a small line in a ledger that had been kept for over 20 years by a man named Roy Bristow. It said, November 1968, $50 paid out to the widow of T. Holloway, Fallen Brother Station 7, River Street Fire, October 22nd. T. Holloway. She did not at first know who that was. She had a mother named Diane Holloway, and her mother had died at 36, and her mother had told her the one time the subject had ever come up, that her own father had died in a fire when she was very small, and that they did not talk about it because talking about it did not bring him back. Myron had been 8 years old when her mother had said that. Her mother had not said his name. In all the years since, in every conversation and every photograph, his name had never appeared. But sitting on the cold concrete in the basement, with the flashlight from her phone propped against the open footlocker, and a circle of light falling across the page, she watched the entry settle into focus. He had been a firefighter. In this town, in this building. Her hands began to shake. It was not fear. Fear she knew. This was something else. This was a thing she had no name for. The feeling of finding out all at once that you were not the first person in your family to walk into a strange room with a small key in your hand and an enormous, unanswerable question in your chest. That somebody had been here before you. That somebody had hung a coat on these hooks. That somebody had walked across this concrete floor and climbed those stairs and slept on the upper floor and gone out the bay door into the dark when the bell rang. And one night in October of 1968, that somebody had been her grandfather and he had not come back. She closed the ledger gently. She held it against her chest. The basement around her was very quiet. She thought for a long moment that she might cry. She had not cried when her aunt's note had been on the trash bag. She had not cried on the bus out of Asheville. She had not cried when she had read her aunt's text by mistake in the bus station. But sitting in the basement, holding the ledger to her chest, she felt for the first time in a very long time Something moved in the place where her tears were supposed to live. She did not cry, but she sat there for a while. When she finally lifted her head, the flashlight beam had begun to dim. The battery on her phone was running low. She set the ledger down beside the bonds. She looked back into the footlocker. The smaller envelope, the one sealed with red wax, was still inside. She did not open it. Something in her, some quiet voice she had learned to listen to in the years when listening to that voice had been the only thing that had kept her alive, told her not to. Not yet. Not down here. Not while the basement was still mostly dark and her flashlight was failing. She slid the wax-sealed envelope back into the canvas pouch. She slid the ledger in after it. She gathered the bonds carefully and slid them in last the brown envelope folded closed. She tied the twine. She picked up the pouch and stood up. Her knees were stiff. The cold had gone all the way through her jeans into her bones. She turned and walked the flashlight in one hand, the canvas pouch in the other, back toward the stairs. She was halfway across the basement when she stopped. She stopped because her flashlight beam swinging across the concrete floor had caught something she had not seen on the way in. Footprints, not hers. The basement floor was damp in patches, and the patches had a fine layer of dust over them, and the footprints in the dust were clear and recent. 2 sets, coming in from the stairs, going to the back corner where the footlocker was and coming back. The treads were the treads of work boots, larger than her own, a man's boots by the size and the depth of them. The footprints were not days old. They were, by the look of them, perhaps a week old, maybe less. She stood in the middle of the basement and looked at the footprints, and she thought about the woman at the county office and the way she had said 2 folks have come for it in the last 6 years. The last buyer had not been frightened of the building. The last buyer had been frightened of what was in the building, and whoever it was had not taken what they had found. She turned the flashlight off. She did not need it to find the stairs. The dim gray light from the bay above falling down the staircase was enough. She climbed. When she came up out of the basement and pushed the iron door closed behind her, the door made a soft, final mechanical sound, the sound of a building accepting that it had been entered and would now be entered again. She did not yet know what was in her wax-sealed envelope. She did not yet know what she had inherited and what she had walked into and who exactly had been in the basement before her and why they had run. But she knew her grandfather's name now, and she knew that he had hung a coat on a metal hook on this wall and had walked out into the dark and had not come back. She tightened her grip on the canvas pouch. And outside on the cracked concrete apron in front of the bay door, the silver-haired woman from the county office was just then beginning to walk up Plank Road in the morning light with a paper sack in one hand and her other hand pressed against her chest as if she were holding something back inside it that she had been holding back for a very long time. The knock came 3 times. It was a soft knock, the way a polite knock is soft, and it came not on the small wooden door where a person who did not know any better would have knocked, but on the steel of the bay door, where a person who had known this building all her life would have knocked, because the bay door was where you knocked when you wanted the men inside to hear you. Marin was halfway up the staircase with the canvas pouch held against her chest when the sound came. She froze. The pouch in her arms was the only warmth in the building. She could feel the leather of the ledger through the canvas and the stiff edges of the bonds and the small hard square of the wax-sealed envelope. She could feel her own heart against the pouch, which felt strange to her. She could not remember the last time she had been able to feel her own heart against something. The knock came again, 3 times, soft and patient. She came back out the stairs slowly. She set the canvas pouch behind the bottom step of the staircase in the small triangle of shadow there, where it could not be seen from the door, and she walked to the bay opening and stepped around the rusted edge into the morning. The silver-haired woman from the county office was standing on the cracked concrete apron with a paper sack in her hand. Her cardigan was still buttoned all the way to the throat. Her glasses were pushed up on top of her head. Her other hand was pressed against her chest, and when she saw Marin step out of the bay, her hand came down slowly. "You stayed," the woman said. The woman took a small step closer. She held out the paper sack. There was a smell of butter and bread coming out of the top of it. "Biscuits," she said, "from the diner. You haven't eaten." It was not a question. Marin took the sack. "I'm Lorraine," the woman said. "I should have told you that yesterday. I'm sorry I didn't tell you because I wasn't sure I was going to be able to, and I didn't want to start something I couldn't finish." "Lorraine, what?" The woman looked at her for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "Lorraine Bristow." The name went through Marin the way a door swinging open goes through a room. "Roy Bristow was my father-in-law," Lorraine said. "He was the captain of the station from 1948 until they shut it down in 1971. He passed in 1985. I married his son Henry in 1969, and Henry passed in 2003, and I have been the only person in this town for 40 years who has known the name on every grave in the firefighter section of the cemetery up on the hill, and one of those graves, child, has the name Holloway on it." Marin closed her eyes. "Your grandfather," Lorraine said. "I have been trying to decide since I read your name on that license yesterday whether I had any right to tell you. I have been awake since 3 o'clock this morning, and I came up Plank Road to tell you that I think I do." Marin opened her eyes. "Tell me what?" Lorraine looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "Come up to the house. Bring whatever you found in the basement. There is somebody I need to call." The house Lorraine led her to was 3 blocks back up Plank Road and one street over a small white frame house with a wide porch and a fig tree in the side yard, and 2 rocking chairs that had been painted so many times the paint had become the chair. The kitchen smelled like coffee and lemon polish. There was a black and white photograph on the wall above the table of 7 men standing in a line in front of a fire engine in heavy turnout coats, all of them grinning. One in the middle, a tall man with a strong jaw and dark hair parted on the side. "Roy," Lorraine said when she saw Marin looking at it. She set the canvas pouch on the table. "That picture was taken in 1962. The same year they put up those civil defense crates in the basement. Roy is in the middle. The boy on his left, the one with the ears, that's Cecil Tanner. He's 83 now. He still walks down to the diner for coffee every morning. The one on Roy's right looking down a little, that's Harold Pace. Harold's 84. He's quieter than Cecil. He always was." Lorraine paused. "The man on the very end," she said, "the tall one with his hand in his pocket. That's your grandfather." Marin went to the wall. She put both hands on the table to steady herself. The man at the end of the line was tall and lean, with a long face and a slight smile, and his hand in the pocket of his turnout coat in a way that it suggested he was not quite comfortable being photographed. The picture was small. The face was smaller. But Marin stood in front of it for a long time, and what she saw in the slope of the eyebrows and the line of the mouth was a face she knew in pieces from her own mirror. "Tom Holloway," Lorraine said it behind her. "Volunteer with Station 7 from 1965 to 1968. Married to Ruth Holloway. They had 1 daughter, Diane." Marin did not turn around. She said, "My mother." "Yes," Lorraine said. "I never met your mother. They left town in the spring of 1969, the year after Tom died. Ruth went home to her people in South Carolina. I don't know if she ever told her daughter much about Calderwood. Some women, after a thing like that, didn't. They couldn't." Marin turned around. Lorraine was sitting at the kitchen table, now her hands folded in front of her on the wood. The morning light came through the kitchen curtains and made a soft band of gold across her face. "Tell me what happened." Lorraine drew a breath. October 22nd, 1968. There was a house fire on River Street on the south side of town, near where the old mill used to be. It was about 11 o'clock at night. The family that lived there had 4 children. The mother was at the hospital with the second youngest, who had been sick for 2 weeks. The father was on a shift at the mill. The 3 children at home were a boy about 10, a girl about 8, and the youngest a little girl 6 years old. There was a babysitter, a girl from up the road 16 years old. She got the 2 older ones out the back door. She could not get to the youngest. The room she was sleeping in was at the front of the house, and the front of the house was already gone. Lorraine looked at her hands. The bell rang at the station at 11:06. Roy was the captain on shift. Cecil was the engineer. Harold was on the hose. Tom was the last man on the truck. They were on River Street within 4 minutes. She lifted her eyes. Tom went in. Roy did not order him to. He went in because there was a 6-year-old girl in a front bedroom, and Tom had a wife at home and a daughter who was 4 years old, and your grandfather child was the kind of man who did not need to be ordered to do certain things. He went in through what was left of the front porch. He found the girl. He carried her out through a window on the side of the house. He handed her to Cecil through the window. Cecil took her. The girl lived. Your grandfather went back inside to make sure there was nobody else in the room because Tom was that kind of man too, and the floor of the bedroom went out from under him while he was doing it. Marin did not move. He died in the basement of the house. He died because he had gone in twice instead of once. And because the second time the floor he was standing on had had 4 more minutes of fire under it, and 4 minutes is a lot of fire. The kitchen was very quiet. A clock on the wall ticked. Outside somewhere, the black and white dog from the side street barked once and stopped. Marin sat down at the table without meaning to. He saved a girl, Marin said. It was not a question. He saved a girl, Lorraine said. 6 years old. Her name was Patricia Lacey. She is 62 now. She lives in Roanoke. She has 3 grown children. The youngest of them is named Tom. Marin put her hands flat on the table. She looked at them. They were the hands she had always had. Long fingers, a small scar on the left thumb from a kitchen knife when she was 12. The same hands that had folded her clothes into a trash bag yesterday, and the same hands that had held a brass key last night, and the same hands that had untied a piece of canvas twine in a basement an hour ago. But they were also, she understood now, hands that came from somewhere. She had not known until this moment that her hands had ever come from anywhere. Lorraine reached across the table and laid her own hand gently over Marin's. Roy paid the widow $50 from the benevolent fund the month after Tom died. He paid her 20 more every month for a year. He called it a fallen brother stipend. He made it up. There was no such thing in the fund rules. He invented it because he could not stand the idea that Ruth and the little girl were leaving Calderwood with nothing. Lorraine paused. He paid the last $20 in October of 1969. By then, Ruth had been in South Carolina for 6 months. He had to get the address from the postmaster. He sent the money in cash with a note. I do not know what the note said. He never told me, and I never asked. But Ruth wrote back to him one time. The letter is in a box upstairs that I have not opened in 20 years. It said, thank you. It said, please do not write again. It said her daughter was getting on, and that getting on for a woman whose husband had died in a fire meant not having his name said in the house. And so Roy never wrote again. And he never told anyone where Ruth had gone. And he never said your grandfather's name out loud after October of 1969 that I ever heard, except to me once on the night Henry and I told him I was pregnant. Marin looked up. Lorraine's eyes were wet now, not crying, just wet the way an old woman's eyes go wet when they have been holding a thing for a long time and the thing has finally been allowed out. He said, I hope it's a girl. Tom Holloway had a girl, and that girl is somewhere in this world, and the world is better for it, even if we are never going to get to see her. So I hope you have a girl. Lorraine smiled faintly. I had 2 boys, but Roy was right about one thing. There was a girl. She just took her time getting here. Marin did not cry. There was a thing in her chest that was bigger than crying. It was the feeling of being known. It was the feeling of having walked into a room and discovered with no warning that the room had been set for her, that a chair had been left out for her, that her name had been on the table the whole time, and nobody had been able to tell her. And the only reason nobody had been able to tell her was that the people who would have told her had been doing the thing people in small towns do for the children of fallen men. They had been waiting. Lorraine, yes. There was a foot locker. It had been opened. Recently, there were footprints in the basement, boot prints. Lorraine's face changed. It did not change much. A tightening at the corners of the mouth, a small drawing in of the breath. But Marin had spent her life reading faces for the smallest changes. Lorraine drew her hand back. Show me. They walked back to the fire station together. Lorraine moved slowly down Plank Road, her hand back over her chest. The morning had grown warmer. A cardinal called from the oak above them and called again, and somewhere a screen door slammed. When they came up the cracked concrete apron of the station, Lorraine stopped. She looked at the building for a long time. I have not been inside this building since 1971. Marin waited. Roy gave me the key one time, after they shut it down. He brought me in here once in the spring of '72. I was pregnant with my first. He wanted me to see it. He stood right where you are standing, and he said, "This is where the men of this town did the most important thing they ever did, and I do not want this place to ever be empty of all of them." He hung his coat on his hook one last time. He left it. He walked out. I never came back. I could not. She did not move toward the bay. "I'll bring it out," Marin said gently. She went inside. She crossed the bay. She knelt at the foot of the staircase and reached behind the bottom step and pulled the canvas pouch out of the shadow. She brought it back into the morning light. Lorraine had not moved. Lorraine was standing on the concrete with her hand pressed against her chest, and when Marin came out and unfolded the canvas on the apron, Lorraine looked down at the spread of bonds and the leather of the ledger and the small, hard square of the wax-sealed envelope, and she put her other hand over the first one. "That's Roy's hand," she said, looking at the cover of the ledger. "That's his initials. He had that ledger made the year he took the captaincy. He kept it for 22 years. She did not pick it up. She looked at the wax-sealed envelope. "I have never seen that." Marin picked it up. She turned it over. The wax was old. The seal pressed into the wax was the print of a small thumb, a man's thumb, the whorl of the print preserved in red wax for 56 years. Above the seal, in the same blue-black ink of the ledger in the same careful hand, was written a single line: "To be opened only if the bonds are claimed by anyone other than the men of Station 7 or their families." Marin read it twice. She held it up. Lorraine read it. Lorraine read it again. Then Lorraine sat down slowly on the cracked concrete apron of the fire station in her cardigan and her good shoes, and she pressed both hands over her mouth, and she said behind her hands, in a voice that came out very small, "Oh, Roy." "What?" "He knew. He knew somebody might come for these. That is why he sealed it. He knew." Marin turned the envelope over. She did not open it. Not yet. Whatever was in the envelope, it had been written by a man 50 years ago for a moment that had not yet arrived. She slid the envelope back into the pouch and knelt down on the concrete beside Lorraine. "Tell me about the footprints," Lorraine said. "2 sets, a man's boots. They went to the back corner where the footlocker was. They came back. The padlock was open when I got there. The hinges had been oiled. The dust on the inside of the lid had been wiped." Lorraine closed her eyes. "The last buyer, the one I told you about, the one who came back in 3 hours. Did you know him?" Lorraine opened her eyes. "He gave a name on the deed. It wasn't a name but from around here. I thought it was a man passing through, looking to flip the building maybe. He paid the $10. He got the key. He came back about 3 hours later. He set the key on the counter. He didn't say a word. I asked him if everything was all right. He looked at me, child, and I have never forgotten the look. He looked like a man who had just been told something he did not want to know." "What name did he give?" Lorraine drew a breath. "Garrett Bristow." The name fell into the morning air like a small stone into a still pool. Marin felt the rings of it move out across the concrete. "Garrett Bristow," Lorraine said again quietly. "Roy's nephew, his brother's boy, the only other Bristow left." She lifted her eyes to Marin. "And the only person Roy Bristow ever threw out of this fire department. In 1969, for stealing from the Benevolent Fund." The morning held. Somewhere at the end of Plank Road, a freight train sounded its horn low and long and patient. Marin looked down at the wax-sealed envelope. She did not open it. but she understood now why it was sealed. She understood also why the last buyer had walked out 3 hours later and put the keys on the counter without a word. He had not been frightened. He had been recognized. He had read the line on the wax-sealed envelope and understood the way a man understands when he is looking at his own name written by a man who knew exactly what kind of man he was, that he had been left a message. And the message had been, "Do not take this." And he had not taken it. He had given up $10 in a building because the only thing he wanted out of the building was a thing he had been told by a dead uncle that he was not allowed to want. But he had not given up. Men like that did not give up. He had only gone away to find another way. A car passed at the end of the block. It was not a car Marin had seen before. It was a long, dark, late-model sedan, the kind of car that does not belong on a plank road in a town of 408 people, and it moved past the cross street at the speed of a car that was looking for something. The driver did not turn his head. He did not have to. Marin saw him in profile through the smoked window. A man in his 50s, smoothly shaven, wearing a collared shirt the color of cream, his jaw set the way the jaw of a man who has come to take something is set when he has not yet decided how much of his money he is willing to spend to take it. The sedan passed. It did not slow. Lorraine had seen it too. Lorraine had gone very still. Was that him? That was him. Marin stood up. Her knees were shaking, but only a little. She held the canvas pouch close against her chest. "I need to know the rest. I need you to tell me what's in that envelope. I need you to tell me what Roy left and who he left it to, and what Garrett did in 1969 that got him thrown out, and what Garrett is going to try to do now." Lorraine looked up at her. "I am going to tell you everything I know, but not here. We are going to go to the diner. We are going to call Cecil Tanner, who knows things I do not, because Cecil was on the engine the night your grandfather died, and Cecil was a young man in 1969 when Roy threw Garrett out. We are going to call Harold Pace because Harold does not say much, but when Harold says a thing, Cecil knows it is true. And then we are going to call a lawyer in Farmville." Marin held out her hand. Lorraine took it. Marin helped her up off the concrete. Lorraine did not let go. "Tom Holloway's granddaughter walked into my office yesterday with $10 in her hand and bought the building her grandfather walked out of for the last time in 1968 and slept in it last night and walked into the basement this morning and found what Roy Bristow left. I have been waiting, child. We have all been waiting. We just did not know it was you." Marin did not answer. She did not have an answer, but she stood on the cracked concrete apron of Station 7 with the canvas pouch held against her chest and the brass key in her pocket and the morning sun warming the back of her jacket, and she felt something settle in her that had not settled in a very long time. The diner was a low brick building 2 blocks off Main Street with 8 booths along the wall and 4 stools at a counter and a coffee pot that had been scorched on the bottom and never replaced because the woman who ran the diner was a woman named Pearl who believed that a coffee pot earned its scorch the same way a person earned a wrinkle, and the polite thing was to leave it alone. Pearl was 66. She wore a paper hat that had not been ironed since 1991. She nodded at Lorraine when they came in, took one look at Marin, and without asking, poured 2 cups of coffee and brought them to the corner booth with a plate of the same biscuits Lorraine had brought up Plank Road, and she set the plate down and said only, "I'll keep the door for you, Lorraine," and walked to the front and turned the cardboard sign on the inside of the glass from open to closed and pulled the shade. Lorraine watched her do it. "Pearl Houghton was Cecil Tanner's sister-in-law," Lorraine said. "She's known about the bonds since 1971. She has never told a soul. She is going to keep that door for as long as we need it kept." Marin looked at Pearl at the back of the diner refilling a salt shaker. Pearl did not look back. Pearl was a woman who knew the value of not looking back at certain moments. Lorraine took her phone out. It was an old flip phone with the silver paint worn off the buttons. She dialed slowly with one finger. The phone rang once. A man's voice answered low and slow. Cecil, Lorraine said, I need you at the diner. She listened. No, she said. Not later, now, bring Harold. She listened again. Cecil Tanner, you have been waiting 56 years for this phone call. Get your hat. She closed the phone. Marin watched her. He'll come, Lorraine said. Harold will come because Cecil will come. They will be here in 8 minutes. Cecil walks down to the diner every morning anyway. He just usually walks slower. Marin wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. The coffee was hot. It was the first hot thing she had touched in 2 days. She closed her eyes and held the cup against her face. When she opened her eyes, Lorraine was watching her. Eat the biscuit, Lorraine said. Marin ate the biscuit. It was the best biscuit she had ever had. She would think this many times over the next 6 months every Sunday when Lorraine brought a plate of them up Plank Road, but this first one eaten in the corner booth of Pearl Houghton's diner with a closed sign in the window and a coffee cup warming her hands was the best of all of them. There was butter inside the biscuit that had been folded in by hand. The biscuit had a small, perfect crust. Marinate it slowly the way a person eats who has not eaten in a long time and knows that you must not eat fast when you have not eaten in a long time because your body will not remember what to do with it. Cecil Tanner came through the door 6 minutes later. He was tall and lean still, even at 83, with a back that had bent only slightly and a head of white hair brushed straight back in a gray windbreaker over a flannel shirt. He held the door for Harold Pace, who came in behind him, smaller, slower, the way a man becomes smaller and slower when he has been the quieter of 2 friends for 60 years and has stopped trying to take up any more space than he has to. They saw Marin in the booth. They stopped. They stood there in the doorway of the diner for what felt to Marin like a long time, the two of them both in old men's jackets, both in old men's caps held in their hands now, because they had taken the caps off the moment they had seen her, and Cecil's mouth had opened slightly, the way a mouth opens when a man is looking at something he never expected to see, and Harold behind him had pressed one hand flat against the door frame as if to steady himself. Lord, Cecil said very quietly. Harold did not say anything. Harold's chin moved. They came to the booth. Lorraine slid out so they could sit. Cecil sat across from Marin. Harold sat next to him. Lorraine sat back down beside Marin on the inside against the wall, the way a person sits when they are guarding something. Cecil looked at Marin's face for a long time. You got his nose, he said. You got Tom's nose. And your mother's eyes, I'd reckon. I never met your mother. But Ruth had eyes like that, gray-like. Marin nodded. She did not trust her voice. Cecil reached across the table. He did not touch her. He laid his hand on the table palm up the way a man might offer a hand to a horse, the way a man offers a thing without taking. His hand was old and brown, and the knuckles were swollen, the way the knuckles of men who have worked with their hands for 60 years swell, and there was a long scar running across the back of it from the base of the thumb to the wrist. Got that, he said when he saw her looking the night your grandfather handed me the Lacey girl out the side window. Window glass. Tom didn't know he'd cut me. I didn't know either till the next morning. Bled clean through my coat. Marin put her hand on top of his. She did not mean to. It happened the way certain things happen in certain rooms when you are 19 years old, and somebody who knew the man your grandfather was is sitting across from you with his hand on a table. Cecil's fingers closed around hers, loose, old, strong enough. I have been waiting 56 years, he said, for somebody to come ask me about Tom Holloway. I have got it all kept, child. I have got the night of the fire. I have got the burial. I have got the day Roy threw Garrett out of the station for thieving. I got Harold here, who was on the hose that night and who was in the bay the day Roy made Garrett empty his pockets onto the floor, and who has not said 3 words about either of those things in 50 years. We are going to tell you what you want to know. Marin found her voice. There is an envelope, she said. Roy left it, sealed, to be opened only if the bonds were claimed by anyone other than the men of Station 7 or their families. I think I have to open it now. But I wanted you here when I did. Cecil looked at Lorraine. Lorraine nodded. Open it, child, Cecil said. Marin took the canvas pouch out of her lap. She set it on the table. She unfolded it. The bonds, the ledger, the wax-sealed envelope. She picked up the envelope. She held it for a moment in her hand. Then she broke the seal. The wax cracked along the edge of the envelope flap with a small, dry sound, and the seal came away in one piece. The red thumbprint still preserved inside it, and Marin slid her thumb under the flap and lifted it. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. She unfolded it. The handwriting was the same handwriting from the ledger, the same blue-black ink, the same patient, careful hand. The page was dated September 4th, 1985, 3 weeks before Roy Bristow had died. It said, "To whoever reads this. If you are reading this, then somebody has come to claim the bonds in this footlocker who is not one of the men of Station 7 or their families. I will tell you who that is most likely to be. It is most likely to be my brother's boy, Garrett. Garrett was a volunteer with this station from January of 1968 to October of 1969. In October of 1969, I caught him taking $42 from the benevolent fund tin in my desk. He had taken 60 more in the months before that. I made him empty his pockets on the bay floor. I dismissed him from the company. I did not file charges because his mother was my brother's wife, and she was dying of cancer in the same season, and I did not have it in me to put a sheriff at her door. I am writing this with the knowledge that I am dying and that Garrett knows about the benevolent fund and does not know that the bonds are kept in this footlocker. He will find out eventually because men like Garrett find these things out. When he does, he will come for them. He will say he is family. He will say he is owed. He is not owed. Cecil Tanner was on the engine the night Tom Holloway died. Harold Pace was on the hose. They both saw Garrett take the money. They will tell you the truth if you ask them. There is a sworn statement in the records of the Calderwood Volunteer Fire Department, filed October of 1969, signed by Cecil and Harold and myself, naming Garrett as the man who stole from the fund and dismissing him for cause. The statement is in the captain's drawer at the new station out on Route 360 if it has not been thrown out. I have asked Chief McCabe's predecessor to keep it, and I believe Chief McCabe will keep it too. The bonds in this footlocker belong to the men of Station 7 who gave the money, and to their families who waited for them, and to one family above all, the family of Tom Holloway, who died in the line on October 22nd, 1968, and whose widow Ruth and daughter Diane left this town with very little because there was very little left to give them. If a Holloway is ever found, the bonds belong in their entirety to that Holloway, and the men of Station 7 have given me their word that that is right. If the Holloways cannot be found, the bonds belong to the Volunteer Fire Department of Calderwood to be used for equipment training in the care of fallen brothers' families. If Garrett Bristow attempts to claim them, this letter is to be entered into evidence. The men of Station 7 have signed below. Roy Bristow, Captain Cecil Tanner, Engineer Harold Pacehose, James Pickering, Volunteer, Howard Lacey, Volunteer, Andrew Cruz, Volunteer, Walter Drury, Volunteer. The signatures were all there. 7 men, 3 of them living, 4 of them buried up on the hill in the firefighter section of the cemetery that Lorraine had told her about. Marin held the letter for a long moment. Then she handed it across the table to Cecil. Cecil read it. Cecil's eyes filled. Cecil did not let them spill. Cecil was a man of his generation. Cecil handed the letter to Harold. Harold read it. Harold pressed the heel of his hand to his mouth and held it there for a long time. When Harold lowered his hand, he said the first thing he had said since coming through the door of the diner. Roy thought of everything. Cecil nodded. Roy thought of everything, Cecil said. Lorraine wiped her eyes with her thumb. The bell on the door of the diner did not ring because Pearl had locked it, but a knock came on the glass. 3 knocks. Soft, patient. The same 3 knocks Lorraine had used on the bay door of the fire station that morning. Pearl walked to the door. Pearl looked through the glass. Pearl turned back toward the booth and lifted both eyebrows. Lorraine looked at Marin. "That'll be him," Lorraine said. Marin looked toward the door. Through the glass on the sidewalk in his cream-colored shirt and his shaved face and his good shoes stood Garrett Bristow. Beside him stood another man, slighter in a navy blazer, holding a leather portfolio against his chest, the way a lawyer holds a portfolio when he wants you to know, before he has said a word, that he is a lawyer. Pearl did not open the door. Pearl waited. Lorraine in the booth lifted her chin once Pearl turned the lock. The door opened with a small chime. Garrett Bristow stepped inside. The lawyer stepped in behind him. The cold morning air came in with them. Pearl closed the door but did not turn the sign. Garrett looked at the booth. He saw Marin. He saw the canvas pouch open on the table. He saw the bonds spread out. He saw the leather ledger. He saw the unfolded letter in Cecil's hand. He saw sitting at the booth the silver-haired woman in the oatmeal cardigan, and the tall old man with the scar on his hand, and the smaller older man beside him with red eyes, and the 19-year-old girl in the middle with the photograph of her mother probably still folded in her jacket pocket, and the brass key to the building probably still in her jeans. Garrett's face did one thing for a fraction of a second, a thing he could not stop. The way a man cannot stop a face from doing the thing it does when it sees its own ending walking toward it. And then the face he had brought with him from his car came back. "Miss Holloway," he said. The voice was warm. The voice was the voice of a man who had spent a lot of money learning how to make his voice warm. "My name is Garrett Bristow. This is my attorney, Mr. Vance. May we sit?" He started toward the booth. Cecil Tanner stood up. Cecil was 83 years old. Cecil was tall and lean, and his back was only slightly bent. Cecil stood up out of the booth without using the table to push himself up, the way a man stands up when he has been waiting for 56 years to stand up. "You may not sit," Cecil said. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Sir," he said, "with respect, my client has a legitimate claim of inheritance with regard to property in the possession of the young lady, and we would like to discuss." "Son," Cecil said, "I do not know you, so I am going to be polite. But this man behind you is not going to discuss anything in this diner this morning. This man behind you is going to listen, and then he is going to leave. And if he sets foot on the apron of Station 7 between now and the hearing that is going to put him out of this county for good, I will personally walk down to the courthouse and file the affidavit I have been carrying in my coat pocket since 1969. The lawyer's mouth worked. Cecil was already turning. Cecil was sliding the letter across the table to Garrett. "Read that," Cecil said. Garrett did not pick it up. Garrett looked at Cecil. Then Garrett looked at the letter. Then Garrett slowly, unwillingly picked up the letter. He read it. His face did not move. His face had been trained over many years and probably at considerable expense not to move. But the hand holding the letter began very slightly to shake. When he was done, he set the letter back down on the table. He looked at it for a moment, then he looked at Marin. "I want to be clear," he said in the same warm voice. "My uncle was an old man at the end of his life. He made certain accusations about me that were never proven in any court of law. The document you are holding is a private letter. It is not a will. It is not a court filing. The bonds in that pouch were the property of an organization that ceased to exist in 1971. The legal title to those bonds is at the very least contested. I would urge you, miss, before you make any decisions you cannot undo, to consult with." Harold Pace stood up. Harold was the smaller of the two old men. Harold had not said 3 words about the night of the fire or the day Roy had thrown Garrett out in 50 years. Harold Pace looked at Garrett Bristow across the table. Harold said, "I saw you take it. That was all." Harold sat back down. Garrett did not answer Harold. Garrett could not answer Harold. The lawyer behind him had gone the color of milk. Marin stood up. It happened slowly. She put her hands on the edge of the table. She pushed herself up. She was 19 years old. She was wearing the same jacket she had been wearing on the porch in Asheville the day before. She had not slept more than 4 hours in a stretch in 2 nights. She had $3 in her pocket and a brass key to a building that had been closed since 1971. She had a grandfather's name in her chest she had not had at this hour the morning before. She stood up. Mr. Bristow. Her voice surprised her. Her voice was steady. Her voice was a voice she had not heard come out of her own mouth before. My grandfather was Tom Holloway. He died in a fire on River Street in this town on October 22nd, 1968, saving a girl who is now a 62-year-old woman in Roanoke with 3 grown children. My mother was Diane Holloway. She raised me alone in 3 different states on a hospital cafeteria salary, and she died when I was 14 years old. And she never got the $20 your uncle sent her in the last month of 1969, because by then her mother had stopped opening the mail. Garrett's face moved a little this time. He could not stop it. I was thrown out of an apartment in Asheville 2 days ago, Marin said. I came here on a bus with a trash bag and $47. I bought this town's old fire station for $10 yesterday afternoon. I slept on the bunkroom floor last night under a civil defense blanket from 1962. I went into the basement this morning and I found a footlocker that you opened in February and that you walked away from because you read the line my great-uncle wrote in his hand on the front of an envelope, and you understood the way you are understanding now that he had your number and that the men he wrote it for were still alive. Garrett did not speak. I am keeping half of the bonds, Mr. Bristow, Marin said, because my mother died on a hospital salary and there is a child support I am owed 56 years late that nobody in this room can pay me, but the only people who would have wanted to pay it are sitting at this table beside me. I am giving the other half to the Calderwood Volunteer Fire Department because that is what my great-uncle wrote in the letter you just read, and because, Mr. Bristow, I happen to agree with him. She picked up the letter from the table. She folded it once carefully along its original creases. She slid it back into the wax-cracked envelope. She set the envelope on top of the bonds in the canvas pouch. You are going to live in my diner now, Pearl Houghton said from the front of the diner, in a voice that had been waiting 56 years to be the voice it was right now. And you are going to leave my town, and if I see your car on Plank Road again, I am going to come out of this kitchen with the cleaver Mr. Bristow, and I am 66 years old, and I no longer give a single small damn what a judge in Farmville thinks about it. The lawyer was already turning. The lawyer had taken one look at Pearl and one look at Cecil and one look at the letter on top of the canvas pouch, and the lawyer was a man who, in fairness to him, knew when his retainer was no longer worth what was about to happen to the rest of his Tuesday. Garrett looked at the lawyer. The lawyer did not look back. Garrett opened his mouth. Garrett closed his mouth. Garrett walked out of the diner. The bell on the door rang as he went. It was the first sound any of them had heard the bell make all morning. Pearl walked to the door. Pearl turned the lock. Pearl turned the cardboard sign back to open because Pearl was a woman who believed in not letting a Bristow change her hours of business. And then Pearl walked back to the booth and refilled all 4 coffee cups and said, I'll be at the counter, and went to the counter. Cecil sat back down. Harold sat back down. Lorraine looked at Marin. Sit down, child, Lorraine said gently. Marin sat down. Her knees were shaking now in earnest. The thing that had held her up was leaving her in pieces. Cecil Tanner saw this happen, and Cecil Tanner laid his big brown hand back on the table in front of her palm, up, and he did not say anything. And Marin, after a moment, put her hand on top of his and let it stay there. And she breathed in, and she breathed out, and the diner went on being a diner around them, the way diners do. The lawyer in Farmville they called that afternoon was named Clarence Dell. Clarence Dell was 68, half-retired, and had handled fire department matters for the county for 31 years. He drove down to Calderwood the following morning, looked at the bonds, looked at the ledger, read the letter, and said in the slow, careful voice of a man who had been a small-town lawyer long enough to know that there was almost no situation that good documentation and a calm afternoon could not solve. Miss Holloway, your title is clean. The bonds are yours. Mr. Bristow has, in my professional opinion, not a single foot to stand on in any court in this Commonwealth. He will not file. If he does file, he will be sanctioned. I would not waste another night of sleep on him. Clarence was right about the first part. He was wrong about Garrett going quietly. Garrett did not file. Garrett did not need to. Garrett, it would turn out, was not the part of the problem that had been driving the car. The first crack in the wider thing came on the following Wednesday when a man in a county truck pulled up in front of the fire station with a clipboard and a yellow paper bag stapled to the clipboard and got out and walked up the apron and posted a notice on the small wooden door. Marin came down from the upper floor. The notice was a county condemnation order. The structure was unsafe, critical roof damage, compromised electrical, foundation seepage exceeding code. Subject building was to be vacated within 30 days and demolished thereafter at owner's expense. Signed at the bottom by the building inspector for Calderwood Township, R. Hadlow. Marin stood on the apron in the late morning light and held the paper in her hand and read it twice. Then she folded it in half. She walked 4 blocks back to the diner where Pearl was pouring coffee and Cecil Tanner was already at the counter. She set the notice on the counter. She did not have to say anything. Cecil read it. Cecil's face did the thing his face did when something was wrong that should not have been possible. Hadlow, Cecil said. You know him. I know his last name. There's only one Hadlow family in this part of Virginia. Royce Hadlow has been the building inspector for Calderwood for 2 years. Before that, he was at the county courthouse over in Nottoway. He came in from somewhere west originally. He is married to a woman named Coretta. Cecil looked at Pearl. Pearl said Coretta Hadlow is Coretta Strand, from up in Powhatan. Cecil sat down on a stool slowly. Hollis Strand's sister, Cecil said. He said the name like it was a name that explained things. Marin did not know who Hollis Strand was. She would learn by the end of the afternoon. Pearl made calls. Lorraine made calls. By 3 o'clock, they had it laid out on a pad of yellow legal paper in the corner booth. Hollis Strand was a developer out of Richmond. He had been quietly buying up property in 3 small towns along the abandoned Norfolk and Western Rail Line for the last 18 months. The pattern had not been clear to anyone in Calderwood because the parcels were small and went through 3 different shell companies, but laid out on the legal pad, they were unmistakable. Strand was assembling piece by piece a long, thin corridor of land that ran from the old depot in Burkeville south through Calderwood and on toward Crewe, a corridor in which the rumor in the county clerk's office over in Farmville had been for the last 6 months somebody was planning to build a luxury rail trail resort with a spa and a restored steam line and cabins where the section houses used to be. Garrett Bristow had been seen in Calderwood twice before he had come for the fire station. Both times he had been having lunch at a steakhouse in Farmville with a man in a dark blazer. The man in the blazer matched Hollis Strand in a description Pearl pried out of the waitress at the steakhouse before sundown. The condemnation notice on the fire station was signed by Royce Hadlow, who was Hollis Strand's brother-in-law. Strand had not, it seemed, only been after the bonds. Strand had been after the building. The fire station sat at the corner of Plank Road and the old rail line. It was in fact the parcel that completed the corridor. He sent Garrett first, Cecil said on the pad of yellow legal paper in his slow, careful voice. Garrett was the cheap try. Garrett was supposed to walk out of the deed office with the building for $10 and clean out the basement on the way, and Strand was going to pay him for the building, and he was going to keep what was in the basement for himself. When Garrett came out empty-handed and did not buy the building, Strand had to switch to his second move. He had his brother-in-law condemn it. He thinks he can take it. He thinks he can scare you off it. Same thing in his book. Marin looked down at the legal pad. She looked up. What does it cost, she said, to fight a building inspector in Virginia? Lorraine on the other side of the booth smiled for the first time that day. It does not cost anything, child, she said. If the inspector is corrupt, it costs a phone call to a reporter. The reporter at the Farmville Herald was a woman in her 30s named Ada Cruz. Lorraine knew her grandfather. Ada Cruz drove down to Calderwood the next morning with a notebook and a small camera and spent 4 hours in the corner booth at the diner with Marin and Cecil and Lorraine and Harold And at the end of those 4 hours, she had a story. Ada Cruz was a careful reporter. She did not run the story right away. She spent the next 9 days in courthouses, in record rooms on the phone, with the engineer who had inspected the rail line. She found the shell companies. She found the corridor map. She found 2 retired county clerks willing to confirm on the record that Royce Hadlow had been moved into the Calderwood inspector job at the strange and specific request of a Richmond developer who did not on paper appear to know him. She found in the captain's drawer at the new fire station out on Route 360 exactly where Roy Bristow had said it would be in his letter, the 1969 affidavit, the original signed in 3 hands in blue-black ink, naming Garrett Bristow as the man who had stolen from the benevolent fund. Ada Cruz ran the story on the front page of the Farmville Herald on a Saturday morning with a photograph of the fire station taken from across Plank Road in the late afternoon light, the number 7 still legible above the bay door. The headline took up 2 lines. The story was picked up that afternoon by the Richmond paper. By Sunday morning, it had been picked up by the Roanoke Times and the Virginian Pilot in Norfolk. By Monday morning, Hollis Strand's office in Richmond was not taking calls. By Monday afternoon, the condemnation order on the fire station had been quietly rescinded. By Wednesday, Royce Hadlow had been suspended pending an internal investigation that 3 months later would result in his termination and the loss of his inspector's license in 3 Virginia counties. By Thursday, Garrett Bristow had stopped returning his lawyer's calls. By Friday, Hollis Strand's 3 shell companies had begun very quietly divesting themselves of the parcels along the rail line. The story was not, in the end, a sensational story. Small towns rarely produce sensational stories, even when the bones of the story are sensational. The story was instead the kind of story that sits after it is over, like a stone in the bed of a river, and the water of the town goes on around it and the stone stays. The fire station belonged to Marin Holloway. The bonds belonged to Marin Holloway, and through her half of them to the Calderwood Volunteer Fire Department. The check Marin signed at the small ceremony at the new station on Route 360 the following month came to $43,500. Chief McCabe took it in both hands. Cecil Tanner, who was 83 and had been waiting 56 years to see a check like that, signed it in a Holloway hand, walked over and shook Marin's hand with both of his and held it for a long time and said very quietly, "Tom would have liked you, child. He'd have liked you fine." Then he walked back to his folding chair and sat down and put his hat back on, because Cecil was a man of his generation, and there were certain things a man of his generation did not do for very long in public. The other $43,500 Marin put in a savings account at the small bank on Main Street with a debit card she did not use and a checkbook she kept in the bottom drawer of a kitchen counter she had not built yet. She put the brass key on a nail behind the bay door. Then she got to work. The roof first. The roof was where everything else depended. She walked up Main Street to the hardware store on the corner, a small place that smelled like cut wood and motor oil, and that was run by a man named Lloyd Tatum, who had been running it for 31 years. Marin had a list. Lloyd looked at the list. Lloyd looked at Marin. Lloyd said without comment, "I'll bring it down myself in the truck." Lloyd brought it down himself in the truck. Lloyd's son Sutton, who was 22 and working construction over in Farmville, came down with him on the second trip with a coil of rope and a framing hammer, in a way of looking at a building that suggested he had been raised on buildings. Sutton stood on the apron and looked up at the roof of Station 7 and said, "Miss Holloway, you are going to want the Ashfords for that slate." The Ashfords were a father and son out of Crewe. Wendell Ashford had been laying slate roofs since 1968. His son Tate had been laying them since the year Tate had turned 16, which was 22 years ago. They drove down on a Tuesday morning in a flatbed truck loaded with new Vermont slate and a roll of copper, flashing, and a ladder long enough to take down a barn, and they spent 4 days on the roof of Station 7, and Marin stood on the apron below them and watched. She watched the way they tore off the old slate. She watched the way they rolled the felt under paper. She watched the way Wendell taught his son without seeming to teach the small turns of the wrist that turned a tile from a piece of stone into part of a roof. She asked questions. They answered. By the end of the fourth day, when the new roof sat on Station 7, like it had always been there, Marin understood roofing well enough to fix a slipped tile herself for the next 100 years. And Wendell Ashford, packing up his ladder, looked at her and said, "Pay me what we said, Miss Holloway. Don't tip me. A roof is a roof." Marin paid him what they had said. She did not tip him. The next morning, she started on the windows. 4 upper windows, double pane, ordered from a supplier in Richmond. They came on a Friday on a delivery truck. Marin measured each opening twice. She removed the rotten frames with a flat bar and a hammer, and a patience she had not known she had. She set each new window in with shims and a level and a tube of caulk, and she stood back after each one and looked at it, and she set the next one. It took her 6 days. On the fourth day, Sutton Tatum came by after his shift in Farmville and watched her work for a while from the bay door. "You don't need help," he said finally. "No," she said. "You'd like some anyway." She thought about that. "Yes," she said. He helped her hang the last window. He came back the next Saturday and helped her with the trim. He came back the Saturday after that with a coffee in one hand and a jigsaw in the other. She stopped trying to figure out why he kept coming back after the fourth Saturday. Some questions she had learned did not need answers right away. The bay floor took her 2 long days in a rented pressure washer and a bucket of industrial degreaser and most of the skin off her right palm before she figured out how to wear gloves. When the concrete dried 3 days later, it came up under the epoxy sealer, the color of old wheat with the faint dark grooves of 50 years of fire truck tires still visible if you knew where to look. She sealed the concrete in 2 coats. She did the corners on her knees. She painted the brick walls of the bay white, 3 coats, a roller on a long pole for the high parts, a brush for everything else. The white walls, when she rolled the bay door up for the first time on the new tracks Sutton had helped her install, made the bay practically glow. She did not throw away the metal coat hooks. She took them off the wall one at a time. She wire brushed each one down to bare iron in the workshop she had been building under the bunkroom stairs. She coated each one in clear lacquer. She put each one back on the wall in exactly the position it had been in when she had found it, and at the end of the line of hooks, the last hook, the one nearest the bay door, she left empty, the way Roy Bristow had left his coat one last time and walked out, and the way Marin had decided the way you decide certain things without saying them out loud, that hook was going to stay empty. The bay door took her a week. She freed the rusted rollers with penetrating oil applied every morning until the door finally on the 8th day came off the tracks with a soft hiss of breaking corrosion. She ground each panel down to bare metal in the bay. She primed it. She painted it the original red, the same red Lorraine had brought down a 1962 photograph to verify. And when she rolled the door up for the first time on its new bearings, the morning sun came across the apron and into the bay, and the building, after 55 years, looked again the way it had looked when men in turnout coats had stood inside it waiting for a bell. The upper floor became her home. She insulated the walls with bats she stapled between the studs, wearing a respirator and long sleeves. She ran new electrical with the help of an electrician named Gene Hodges, who Lorraine recommended, who had wired half the houses in Calderwood and who charged Marin a fraction of his normal rate because he said the firehouse deserved to have its lights on again. She framed 2 interior walls, a small kitchen on the west side, a bathroom in the corner, a sleeping area against the windows where the old bed frames had been bolted to the floor. She kept one of the bed frames, she wire brushed it, she painted it black. Sutton helped her hang the new sheetrock because hanging sheetrock alone was the kind of job that broke your fingers if you were not careful, and Marin had become by that point careful about her hands. She kept the wide pine plank floor. She sanded it on her knees, one section at a time, with 3 different grits of paper. The pine came up the color of honey. She sealed it with 3 coats of polyurethane, applied with a lamb's wool pad drying 24 hours between coats. She got the potbelly stove working in October. She had the chimney swept by a man over in Crew. She replaced one cracked section of stovepipe. She bought a cord of seasoned oak from a farmer outside town named Vernon Drury, whose father had been one of the 7 men whose signature was on Roy's letter. Vernon Drury brought the oak down on a Saturday morning and stacked it against the back wall of the bay himself, refusing payment until Marin had used 3 pieces of it, which is how she discovered that night when she lit the first fire of her life in a stove she had repaired with her own hands and felt the heat radiate across the pine plank floor and up into the brick walls that the floor did in fact hold the warmth the way her grandfather had probably known it would. She sat on the floor next to the stove that first night for a long time. She did not cry. She had not after everything cried. Not in the basement, not in the diner, not at the ceremony where she had handed Chief McCabe the check. She had been a person for a long time who did not cry the way other people cried. But she sat on the pine floor that night with the stove ticking and the smell of oak smoke in the room and the brass key on its nail behind the bay door downstairs, and the canvas pouch tucked in a small wooden chest she had built herself out of leftover crate lumber. And she thought about a girl sitting on a porch in Asheville with a trash bag and a yellow note. And she thought about the bus station bench and the dark sedan on the cross street, and Cecil Tanner's hand palm up on the table at the diner, and her grandfather with his hand in the pocket of his turnout coat in a 1962 photograph in a kitchen on Plank Road, and her mother at the kitchen sink not saying his name. And after a while, very quietly, she did cry a little the way a person cries who has finally found a room where it is safe to. Then she got up, she put another piece of oak in the stove. She went to bed. She started taking jobs that fall. Word in a town of 408 people moves the way water moves through a small drain. Steadily, completely. Within a month of her first job, which was rehanging a screen door for the woman who lived in the house with the fig tree 2 blocks from Lorraine's, everyone in Calderwood knew that the girl who lived in the firehouse could fix things. People started calling. A leaking faucet, a loose porch rail, a gutter that had pulled away from a fascia, a garage door that had stopped opening one Tuesday afternoon. The work was small. It paid in $20 bills folded into envelopes and the occasional pie. It was enough to keep groceries on the shelf and oak in the stove, and more than the money, the work itself mattered. Each job was a thread connecting her to the town. A small act of trust exchanged between a neighbor and a girl who had not last spring been a neighbor to anyone. Lorraine brought a roast chicken every Sunday, mashed potatoes, green beans, a slice of pie. They sat in the apparatus bay on 2 folding chairs Marin had bought at a yard sale in Kenbridge for $1 each, and Lorraine told her stories about Roy and Henry and the men in the 1962 photograph. And Marin listened, and the bay door stood open to the warm afternoon light, and the brass key hung on its nail. On a Tuesday in October, a year and a half after she had stepped off a bus on the side of the road outside the closed gas station with a trash bag in her hand, Marin sat on the front step of Station 7 in the late afternoon. The oaks along Plank Road had turned orange and gold. The leaves drifted down in the still air like slow confetti. The church bell rang 6 times. A pickup truck passed on the cross street. Somewhere a dog barked twice and stopped. She thought about Roy Bristow. She thought about the line in the ledger where he had written in his careful blue-black ink in November of 1968 about a $50 payment to a widow. She thought about the wax-sealed envelope that had been waiting for 56 years in the basement of his old fire station for a man named Garrett to come for it, and about the 7 signatures at the bottom of the letter inside, and about how 4 of those 7 men were buried up on the hill, and 3 of them had been at the diner the morning she had broken the seal. She thought about Tom Holloway, the grandfather she had not known she had. She thought about a 6-year-old girl named Patricia Lacey in a front bedroom on River Street on the night of October 22nd, 1968, and about the man who had carried her out a side window and handed her to Cecil Tanner and gone back inside to make sure there was nobody else. She thought about her mother, about how her mother had grown up the daughter of a man whose name had not been said in the house, about how her mother had told her at the kitchen sink when Marin was 8 that they did not talk about it because talking about it did not bring him back, about how her mother had been wrong about that, because talking about him 56 years later in a diner in Calderwood with a closed sign on the door had brought him back in the only way the dead are ever brought back, which is to say into the room where his name could be used again. She thought about how she was 19 years old and how the building behind her, the building her grandfather had walked out of for the last time on the night of October 22nd, 1968, was now hers. How the roof was new, how the windows held, how the bay door rolled smoothly up its tracks, how the floor in the upper room was honey-colored and warm, how a fire would be in the stove tonight, how Lorraine would bring a roast chicken on Sunday, how a small town that had been holding its breath for 56 years had finally slowly let it out. The mourning dove on the roof called once. Marin sat on the step in the fading light in a jacket she had bought herself, with money she had earned in front of a building she had bought for $10, in a town that knew her name. Now in a country that was much larger than the porch she had been locked out of. And she looked down at her hands, the same hands she had folded her clothes into a trash bag with on a Tuesday in March, and she thought about the price of all of it. $10. It was the best $10 she had ever spent. The freight train, far off, sounded its horn one last time as the dark came down low and long and patient, the same horn she had heard on the night she had stepped off the bus with $3 in her pocket and nowhere left to go. And the sound rolled across the rooftops and across the church steeple and down Plank Road and over the cracked concrete apron and around the rusted hinges of a bay door that did not rust anymore. And Marin Holloway, 19 years old, sat on the step of her own building in her own town and did not move and did not need to because the building now was finally home.